Hi guys, it's me. You'll notice that I came, my makeup already done today. I thought that instead of me talking at the camera about myself and sort of musing, I would do something a little bit more educational today. I see a lot of people in various groups I'm in come in and say, hey, I want to do this single mom by choice thing. What do I do? And I have the same question. And so I did go to a clinic here to talk to them last year about it. And they were super helpful and provided me all sorts of documentation. And I know not everyone is lucky enough to get things really spelled out for them. So I wanted to go through what the steps that are kind of like pre-cycle steps. So I'm not actually trying yet, but these are the things that I've had to do to get tested in order to be able to pick a sperm donor, and then a couple other things that could have to be done. So I wanted to go through those, and I'll pepper in sort of what my levels are, what it looks like for me as a person with PCOS. But I do have as a reference the fertility workup guide they gave me. It is Atlanta Center for Reproductive Medicine is where I'm going, so you'll see that. And there's a lot of information in here. I'm going to be working off of it. What's interesting is that these clinics tend to presume that when you come in, you are infertile in some way. So usually the medical definition of that is you have been having unprotected sex with a penis and a vagina for 6 months or so. That's obviously not the case for me. It's not the case for a lot of same-sex couples as well, I know, run into this issue. So this is a little bit more thorough than what I will hopefully need to end up doing to start out with, because this assumes I'm already having trouble conceiving, where I joke that my infertility is self-imposed. So a lot of these things on this list I didn't have to do, but some of them I'm going to touch on anyway. But the absolute first thing that they had you do is a blood work workup. So you go in and you get your blood taken, and they came back with a number of levels. So I am by no means a doctor. You can ask any chemistry teacher I've ever had. But I did do my research, and I have a general understanding of what these are and why they matter. So the first thing they test for is progesterone. Progesterone is something that helps your uterus prepare to hold the fertilized egg. So actually after an insemination, they'll often put you on progesterone because it makes it more likely to stick. And it's something that when you're a premenopausal woman and you aren't pregnant, it's a pretty low level typically. So I believe that it's usually 1 or under. And mine was a 0.2, so that checks out. And then once you're on your menstrual cycle, it will actually increase a little bit to somewhere between 5 and 20. And then once you're pregnant, it goes up from like 11, I think it hits 90 at some point, and ebbs and flows from there. So this is just something they test to see your resting level. I will note, a lot of times these workups are done on a specific day of your cycle. So day 3 of your cycle, during your cycle, etc. Mine weren't. This was just when I went in to get kind of an overall baseline. So some of these things may have been slightly increased had I gone in during a menstrual cycle. The other thing they test is estrogen. Pretty straightforward. Estrogen is estrogen. The normal level for a menstruating woman ranges from like 15 to 350. I think it's picograms, whatever that is. Mine's fairly low. Mine was at about 5. That does probably have to do with PCOS. You often will have higher testosterone and lower estrogen in that case. So it's not surprising to see mine a little bit lower, but it's not super worrisome at this time. The 2 big ones that you'll hear about are FSH and AMH. There's way too many letters to learn here. So FSH is a follicle stimulating hormone. So that makes sense if you think about the fertility process. It helps you to produce follicles that turn into babies. So women who are menstruating typically have it somewhere between like 4.5 and 21 or something like that is their level. And then after menopause, it's often lowers because they're not ovulating and producing eggs. Mine was 1.2. No, it was 1.6. My glasses glare when I film and I don't have them on, so if I misread, that is why. 1.6, so it is fairly low, again, consistent with PCOS. Not that concerning because I'm going to be doing a medicated cycle no matter what, and part of the medication triggers you to ovulate and to make sure these follicles are coming out as they need to. So I would have medication either way, and that number just indicates probably it's a good idea. This is the one I hear about the most, AMH. It stands for like anti-Müllerian hormone. And sure, it's basically produced by the follicles that you have. So it's used to estimate your egg reserve. So women are born with all of the eggs they're ever gonna make. We aren't producing more over time. So every month as you ovulate throughout your cycle, you lose eggs. And this just helps you see how many are left in there. The number is not an actual count where if I say that mine is like 4.9, I have 4.9 eggs. That's not it, it's just a measure. That said, the average is about 1 to 4. So lower than 1 tends to happen with women who are older, past a certain age, or who have various fertility issues. So it's lower, there's not a lot of eggs there, and it can be harder to ovulate them. Now, the upper end of that range is 4. Mine was 4.95, so almost 5. That is pretty consistent with PCOS, is having a high AMH, and that sounds in theory really good, right? I've got a bunch of eggs, they're all in there. It can be bad, especially when it gets into like 6 and above, because what it tends to mean, as my doctor explained it to me, is that I have those eggs, but because I'm not naturally ovulating, they're all just kind of chilling in there. So you can get kind of a backup egg reserve that means there's too many because they aren't cycling as they should be. So that's why 1 to 4 is normal for a woman of reproductive age. So mine's a bit high, not too high. I mean, I've seen it go much higher than that, so not too worrisome. One of the things they'll have to keep an eye on is when I do take a trigger shot to make sure that I don't release a bunch of follicles, because if you have 2, there's a higher chance of twins. 3, there's a higher chance of more. A lot of fertility clinics will not inseminate you if you have over 2 follicles. So it can lead to that when you're being medicated, but that is something with PCOS. A higher number can happen, and that sounds really cool, but there's some considerations there. The other one is the thyroid stimulating hormone. So this is kind of a more general health thing you may have looked at too, is your thyroid. Some people have hyper or hypothyroidism. And there's usually a range from 1 to 4 for this particular hormone. When I went in and had my initial workup done in September of last year, my thyroid was high. It was at 3.9, which was pretty consistent with being more overweight at the time, and a couple of other pre-existing conditions. The doctor did last month put me on a thyroid medication, and it's now down to 1.72. So back within that normal range of 1 to 4. They say, and by they I mean Google, that it shouldn't be higher than really 2.5 for conception. That's kind of the optimal range it's in. So that's why my doctor wanted to get me lower, even though I was technically at the high end of the normal range. 2 other things that they check. One is prolactin. So this is actually the hormone that causes your breasts to grow and your milk to come in. So it's something that when you're pregnant, it's going to go way up as opposed to a non-pregnant woman in the reproductive years. But it can inhibit the follicle stimulating hormone. So the more prolactin you have, the less of that. So if I'm not pregnant and I'm not breastfeeding, I don't need that prolactin. So you want to see a lower level of that. So mine was a 16, which the normal range is 2 to 30. So we're doing good there. And then the other one is vitamin D. Vitamin D is good for you in general. It's just a health measure that you should take. It's also linked to less birth defects and general fertility in a lot of studies. So they test your vitamin D. Mine was at a 36. What I found said it should be over 25 for someone my age. So seems like I'm doing good there. I truly don't know how I avoid the sun at all costs. And I'm pretty sure vitamin D is the sun one, right? Sunny D? Yeah. But I will take it. So that was my initial fertility workup, which was pretty good news because only a couple of the numbers are really out of the normal range and they're things that can be treated. There's a couple of other blood tests that they run while you're there. And these really have to do with picking a sperm donor. So they're not necessarily about your health so much as they are about who you're picking. And these can be kind of controversial because they're things that most people don't get done when they're just getting married and having a baby, or meeting someone and having a baby. And most of the time your baby's fine. But if you're going about it this way and you have access to this information, my thought is that you might as well use it. So the first thing is CMV, which stands for cytomegalovirus. Sure. It's basically a very common infection that a lot of women have had at some point without knowing it. And that's fine. It's not harmful or anything like that. But if you were to get it when pregnant, it can be harmful. And so basically, they'll test you to decide if you're negative or positive. If you're negative, it means you've never had it, and that puts you at risk for getting it. So if you are negative, you want to make sure you pick a sperm donor who isn't positive, because they could give it to you, right? So it's like, if I don't have something, you can give it to me. If you are positive, the status of your donor doesn't really matter. So if you already had it, it doesn't matter if they're positive because you're not going to get it. You already have the antibodies. And if they're negative, it also doesn't matter. So mine did come back positive. So at some point I had this CMV. So I have pretty much my pick of sperm donors, but for some people where it comes back negative, you'll have to be more careful. And every sperm bank does give this information that I've seen, so you can know if someone's positive or negative. I, again, have seen women say, well, if I met someone random or got married, I wouldn't know this information, it's fine. It really has to do with your risk tolerance, but it is a test they'll give you, and it's something that the documentation provided has like a little chart of what to do in each scenario. There is a third option where you're positive and active for it, and everything basically says if that's the case, you need to call the doctor and like talk about your plan if you have an active infection versus just having the antibodies. So CMV is probably a buzzword that you'll hear a lot. They also do a blood type test. This was kind of fun just because I had never had my blood type before. I didn't know what it was. This, from what I found, in my scenario is not that important. The only things I found about why you would want your blood tested before you pick sperm is if you were trying to match a spouse. So if I, for example, had a husband who was infertile and could not have children and we were going to use a sperm donor, I might want that child to have the same blood type our child would so that he could donate blood in the future. Sometimes that's so people can lie to their children and not tell them, because that is a way people find out, right? You have a kid come home and their blood type is something their parents' blood type could not feasibly mix. So from what I found, this is more of a social choice. There's nothing dangerous about mixing certain blood types with others. So I haven't paid any attention to this in my search for a donor, but some people do find it very important. And then the last factor is genetic screening. This is optional. Again, a lot of people will not get genetic screenings when they're having babies with their partner. I specifically wanted to get one because I'm Jewish, and Ashkenazi Jews are carriers for a number of things in high numbers. The main one being Tay-Sachs, which is a pretty not good, it can be deadly disease in babies. And when Ashkenazi Jews reproduce with other Ashkenazi Jews, there's a high risk for it. So I knew I was going to get a screening for that reason, because I'd be looking at Jewish donors. I actually had two separate screenings for complicated reasons. I had a regular one through Myriad that my doctor did, and then I had one through JScreen, which is a Jewish specific foundation. It's the same test. It came back with the same results. I did not have the markers that are common for Ashkenazi Jews, so I didn't have to worry about that part. There are two things I came back for. There's a list of like 200 diseases that you've primarily never heard of, and it'll tell you what you're a carrier for. So I had two. One was hereditary fructose intolerance. I don't have that. I'm just a carrier for it, and it can basically just be dangerous based on the food a child's eating, as well as PKU. So that has to do again with the body being unable to break down certain proteins in certain food. I have been able to filter those out. I think I've only encountered one donor that was a carrier for either of them. So they haven't been inhibitive, but if there was something that was more common or I was seeing, I would want to use that and say, we can't both be a carrier, because if we're both a carrier, the chances that the child has an issue go way up. So if you want to and can afford it, the genetic testing is great. Mine was covered. I'm not sure how. My insurance doesn't cover it. And basically what they did is took the blood and sent it in and said, tomorrow you'll get an email that tells you how much it will cost you. And it could be anywhere from $0 to $1,300. And with that, you'll decide if you want us to actually do the testing. Now, how'd they come back and said it's $1,300, we would have been rolling some dice on that, because I'm not paying you $1,300. But it came back that I qualified for something or other, and it was $0. And then the J screen was also through a grant, and so that was paid for me. So if you have the option, again, I don't see why you wouldn't, but it's something that a lot of people don't do this. It's obviously not necessary, so it's up to you. So those are all of the things I've done as pre-IUI measures. There are a couple other tests I haven't done. Well, there's a lot of other tests, right? This page is a full list of different tests you can get done. Again, most of these would be done after some sort of proved infertility. There's 3 that I see commonly done early on, and my doctor doesn't feel that I need to do them before insemination, but you might hear about them, so I just wanted to touch on them. One is a day 3 or a baseline ultrasound. This is basically an ultrasound they do on the 3rd day of your menstrual cycle to assess the number of resting follicles, to the blood flow to your uterus, anything that's abnormal or looks off. They'll usually do blood tests at this time too, to basically just get a sense of what your cycle looks like. I'm going to do this early in the first cycle I start trying. So if something does come back as a red flag, we would push that off. I haven't done it yet, but some people will do it early. I'm still on birth control right now, so it wouldn't make sense because I'm not going to ovulate. The other one is an HSG, which stands for, let's see if I can do this, hysterosalpingogram. Salpingogram. It's an HSG. Basically, they injected dye into your fallopian tubes to ensure that they're open and that something could get through it into the uterine cavity and everything is normal. It's done day 6 to 12 of your cycle. I have heard mixed things. Some people say it was nothing, and some people say it was excruciatingly painful. So I don't want to take that chance if I don't have to, but it can reveal any blockages. So you might hear HSG paired with an SIS. So that's a saline infusion sonohysterogram. And those are usually done at the same time from what I've read. And basically it helps you to see any abnormalities in the uterus. So any scar tissue, polyps or fibroids, things like that that might prevent implantation. It can help show you those. So you can see why if you were already having trouble conceiving, those would be useful things to do. But we've decided I don't need to do them until I have any demonstrated issue, because there's no reason to believe I have issues like that. So those are all the tests that would be leading up to an IUI, especially in a scenario where you're single and not technically deemed infertile from a medical perspective. The other thing I wanted to share with you is this handy list they gave me, and it's getting ready for pregnancy. And most of these are pretty basic things, right? Don't eat crap food. Move a little bit. Nothing shocking, but what I liked about having this list is that in the time between me getting initial tests and me being able to start actually trying, it makes me feel like I have a checklist of things to do. You can see I've gone through and marked off with little stars like the things I'm actively doing where it makes sense. And that's just made me feel good. Again, nothing here is too shocking. So if you go through, it's got achieve a healthy weight. We could sit here all day and talk about what a healthy weight means. I don't have time for all that. According to this, your BMI should be between 20 and 28. Sure, Jan. But there probably is something. Do what you want on that one. With that is get some exercise, and that is never bad advice. It's not for losing weight, it's just that moving your body is good for it. It can improve, for me, can improve insulin or blood sugar when you have PCOS, and it's just generally good for you. Plus, if you've ever hung out with a baby, you're gonna need to be able to run around and pick it up, and it's not the most sedentary activity, so it can't hurt to prepare yourself that way. So that takes care of our fat phobic life, be skinny or whatever. Quit smoking. Duh. It's not good for fertility, and you also should not be smoking while you're pregnant. So the earlier you can stop, the better. It is known to reduce the number of healthy eggs that you have if you smoke. So there is a fertility related reason. And also just cigarettes are bad for you. Don't smoke them. Can't hurt. Limit alcohol, caffeine, and artificial sweeteners. Again, be generally healthy. These are things they will recommend against in pregnancy. If you're curious about that, I recommend the book Expecting Better by Emily Oster, just because it talks about why they recommend against these and how much of that's actually real. But it doesn't hurt to limit alcohol, caffeine, or sweeteners. I don't drink alcohol and never really have. And I no longer drink soda, so I'm out of most of those. I still do some artificial sweeteners, but I live in the United States. What do you want from me? Take prenatal vitamins, folic acid, vitamin D. They say to start those early. I've been on them for a while just because after the bariatric surgery that I had, hair loss is a symptom, and I had some, and it contains things that help your hair grow. So I've actually been taking prenatal vitamins. Folic acid and vitamin D in particular help reduce risks of certain birth defects, but it doesn't hurt to start those early. It still has stuff that's good for you. Same with, I don't know how to say this, but it's like CoQ10, coenzyme Q10. It basically helps with energy production, and that includes energy available to eggs that helps them do everything they're supposed to do. So I take this already for high cholesterol that I've had. I've been taking this for about a year, no problems, but it is something you can add in. It's an over-the-counter vitamin type thing, so you can get it at that aisle at Walmart where all the vitamins are, and it even comes in gummy form if you're like me and prefer candy vitamins. Know your infectious disease status, get immunized. Obviously, if you have hepatitis B or C, syphilis, HIV, anything like that, you would want to know ahead of time just so that you can manage your pregnancy accordingly. And then get your vaccines. We get vaccines here. Vaccines are good. Get them. Some things that would be fairly mild for you can be a lot more serious in pregnancy. So you want to make sure that you are protected against them. What else does this have? Get genetic carrier screening done. We talked about that already. And then keep up on your annual exams, your pap smears, mammograms if applicable, all that good stuff. Basically, this list is make sure you're healthy in general. But like I said, I liked it because I could treat it like a checklist of, okay, I'm not technically trying right now, but I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing this. So hopefully that's a good first step for people that come in and say, I don't know where to start with this. That was what happened at my first appointment. These are the initial steps we talked about to prepare me to start trying to conceive. I will talk in the future about next steps and picking a sperm donor and what all of that looks like. But I thought this might be good for people saying, how do I do this? To just lay out the different tests you're going to take and what they mean and what to look out for. So hopefully that was helpful for everybody. Let me know in the comments if there's a specific test that you have questions about, if I did or didn't do it, if there's reasons it's different, again, being single versus being coupled and seeking fertility treatment. But I appreciate you guys watching. I hope that you learned something, and I will talk to you again soon.